Rana, and welcome to FM Tahiti to Stats, or Stats for FM. In this episode, which is hopefully a bit briefer than the kind of half an hour correlation one, we're going to be looking at tests of differences. So how do you find whether there's a difference in a score or a statistic between two or more groups? So rather than looking for a relationship between two variables, we're looking to see if there's a difference between a score between two or more groups. So much like looking at whether there's a difference in IQ score between two groups, whether there's a difference in recovery rates between two groups of people getting two different types of treatment, we're going to apply something similar to our kind of situation. So I'll briefly mention the caveats and assumptions like I did in the other episode, only briefly. And we'll mention a little bit about t-tests, a little bit about ANOVAs, because these are the two we're going to look at. And we're going to use the examples of probably when we do the SPSS kind of walkthrough of different personality types and different age groups, just because these are nice simple things to use for the data we've got. There are other kind of groupings you can create. Anything where you can create what we call a categorical variable, where you've got different groups or different sort of windows of time where you've taken the same measure, you can do a kind of test of difference on it. So as I mentioned in the other episode, all of these stats are working on the assumption that this is all your own data from your own players over however many seasons, using your tactic and setup with the similar player role setup and so on, using a similar tactic to try and control for as many confounding variables as you can. So in this I've got about 4 seasons worth of data from the senior team, 4 seasons of me playing 4-4-2 long ball, crazy gang style, bar 1 or 2 games where I lost my mind and went to something a bit more fancy. Mostly the same play roles, so I think I mentioned in the other episode, target man and pressing forward tends to be my favoured pairing up front, for example. That's not changed in about 4 seasons. And I had 1 season in the second tier, 3 seasons in the first tier, so it's fairly controlled for, so 4 professional seasons in total. And all of this is kept roughly the same. So I can see what effect the other variables are having on their performance. And this is so I can tweak my team recruitment and my selection and things like that to make sure it's working for my tactic and my plan. So the variables and things I'm talking about here and the results I find might not apply to you and the way you've got your setup, because you'll have a different tactic with different roles and playing at a different level, for example. So you'll need to run this yourself for your own data, and it's all fairly easy to do. And just again as a reminder, we can use stats to describe, which is what the stats in the actual game are doing. We can use them to predict, we can use them to make kind of logical inferences, but they're not always going to be 100% accurate, and I can't really apply or extend beyond what my sample is meant to be representing. My sample is just meant to be representing my game for this. So tests of differences, and this won't take me long. Broadly speaking, in statistics we can either describe data with things like means and percentages, we can test for relationships between variables, these are things like correlations, which I mentioned in the last episode, or things like multiple regression, which I mentioned briefly in the introductory episode, and I'll cover it again in more depth in the very next episode, I think. We can also test for differences in scores between variables or between groups. And traditionally you've got 2 types of tests broadly to choose from. You've got t-tests, and these are also known as student t-tests, and these are between 2 groups or 2 comparisons. So an independent t-test is where you've got 2 independent groups and you want to see is there a difference in a score between them. So for example, is there a difference in test scores between people who are 16 and below and people who are 17 and above? Particular test. Is there a difference between people on one set of therapy compared to another set of therapy when you measure them on a depression index, for example? So that'd be an independent t-test, 2 separate groups. Another one would be a difference between males and females, giving you a score for something as well, because they're in 2 separate groups. The participants only ever contributing to one of those groups. Each group is independent from the other. You can also have a repeated t-test or a paired t-test, which is where you might have one group of participants giving you a couple of measures. So this is where you get things like before and after scores or intervention scores. So you might have someone's anxiety score, and then you might have their anxiety score after they've gone through a particular type of therapy, and that would give you a comparison. Two scores before and after, and you'll see is there a significant difference between the two scores to see if that intervention, if that therapy has had an effect. So that's t-test, independent or repeated, and it works with just two groups, two comparisons. If you've got more than two groups, if you've got 3+, and there's no upper limit technically on this, then you would run what we call an ANOVA, so an analysis of variance. That's all that stands for. And all it's doing really, at the most basic level, is the same job as a t-test, but with 3 or more groups. So you might have treatment A, treatment B, treatment C. And you want to see which group of participants from these is getting a better anxiety score or depression score at the end, for example. So it's just for 3 or more. So for us, one of the things we might want to look at is whether there is a difference in average rating or whatever other statistic we choose, because I've already mentioned average rating's not the best, between our older players, sort of Craggy Island OAP-esque players, and our younger players. So, which age group's performing better? Or alternatively, one of the things we could look at is personality. So which personality group is performing better on certain measures? That's if we were doing an independent sort of design. If we wanted a repeated measure design, one of the things we could look at is a change in average rating across seasons or across years. So as our players get older, every season we could have a snapshot of their average rating and see are they getting better? Are they having significantly better or worse performances in certain years? So you can kind of track improvements to see where significant improvements have been made. So you'd have a year 1 score, a year 2 score, a year 3 score for the same group of participants or the same group of players. So we're going to look at a few examples a bit like this. We're going to be focusing mainly on the independent ones between separate groups, because it's going to be hopefully quite a quick episode. So we'll move on to using SPSS now. Okay, so I've got SPSS back up, and what we have here is my general Tahiti sheet, just like I used in some of the other episodes. This has just got the general attributes and bits of information. So you've got things like their personality type, their average rating, teamwork, work rate determination, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Win percentage, or game win percentage, points per game, mistakes leading to goal, mistakes age. And we've got another category called good, bad here, which I'll tell you about in a second. So let's say we've got personality type. And all of these are just numbers, so it doesn't actually match up to the kind of personality types you have in the game. So leader, casual, determined, realist, and so on. It's just numbers, and that's because SPSS can only really analyse numbers. It only analyses numeric data. So if you've got something that is in text, like a description of a personality, you've got to convert it into a code. So you've got to give it a numeric code so it represents a particular type of personality. So 1, for example, is our representative for a balanced personality. And what you can do is when you put this into the variable view, you can assign values. So I've already told the software that 1 equals balance, 2 is low determination, 3 is fairly loyal, so on, all the way through all the different personality types I have in my team. This isn't all the personality types, it's just the ones I had in my team. And the order is literally just the order I went through them when I was putting the data together. There's no kind of ranking or anything like that, it's just telling them which category, which group all of these are. And because I've been clever and put those labels in, I can press this button up here, for those of you who are kind of number phobic, and it'll tell me here. So all this is doing is SPSS is just using that label, that value I put in, to show me what these numbers represent. It's not getting rid of the numbers. Switch it off, it goes back. It's just showing me what those numbers represent. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to see, is there an effect of personality type on some of these different variables like win percentage, mistakes, average rating. We'll use average rating first, even though I've said it's not the best one to use because of the way it's skewed. We'll just use it just to demonstrate something. So you've got to go down to where it says general linear model and choose univariate. So this is just an ANOVA. which is the way it represents it in the software. Our dependent variable is our average rating, and our fixed factor, or our independent variable, the one we see if there's an effect of, is personality. We put that in there. There's a few bits we need to tick. So we need to give us some descriptive stats, some effect size. I'm not going to put the homogeneity test in there because that's too much of a tangent, but you should do, really. We told it also to do what we call a compare main effects, or a Bonferroni correction, which is the fancy way of saying it's going to compare all these different groups. So we've got 13 different categories. So if it finds that there's a significant effect of personality, it's going to run extra tests to try and work out where those differences actually are. So we're going to run it now. First of all, this is the key thing we have to look at. This very first box is telling us how many people got in each category. So we've got 37 with balanced, 2 with low determination, 11 with loyal, 3 with determined, 23 unambitious, and so on. And you can kind of see that there are some categories that just don't really have many people in, and this is actually a problem for the analysis. You can't really just compare the score for one person with everyone else. And there are some groups that are much bigger than others. We've got 37 balanced, 11 loyal, 23 unambitious. These are the bigger groups. So this is going to really skew and mess with our data when we've got so many groups to compare across. And if we look down here, this where it says personality, if we look across the significance value, this is what we want to see as being less than 0.05 if there's a significant effect of personality. And 0.018 is less than 0.05. So it's saying there is a significant effect of personality, but when we look at all the comparisons, so this bit here, it's called pairwise comparisons, it's comparing every possible pair. So it's comparing balanced personality to all of these and telling us whether there's a significant difference or not. It's saying 1, it means there's not. If we look down, there's lots of these comparisons, because it's doing so many of them. But actually it's not showing us where a significant difference is. None of these values are actually less than 0.05. And that's because we've hit a huge kind of error issue with the fact that we've only got a few participants in each group. So what do we do with this? So one of the things I decided to do, if we go back to the data, is create an extra personality variable. So just whether they've got a good personality or a bad personality. So I told the program essentially to recode a new variable or compute a new variable, and I told it to take all these different codes here, and if it's what I consider to be a good personality type that I think is positive and I want in the team, to give it the value 1, and if it's bad, to give it the value 2. So resolute, for example, here is good, and ambitious is bad, balanced I've said is good because it's kind of neutral, leader's good, lighthearted's bad because I don't want them having fun, realist I think is good, sporting I've decided is bad because I want my team to be fairly brutal and dirty and play a real kind of crazy gang elbow throwing football. Professional is good, and so on. So it's now created 2 categories. So what we can do is, instead of using an ANOVA with 13 groups, we're going to do a t-test with just 2 groups. So what we can do here is go to Analyze and go to where it says Compare Means, go to where it says Independent Samples t-test. What we can do here is put in good, bad, and just remind the program that we've got used the numbers 1 and 2. And in the test variables, we can put all the test variables we're interested in. So I'm going to put all of these plus average rating. It's just going to run a t-test for each of them. It's going to go through them reasonably quickly. So first of all, we get our group statistics. So the first thing we can check is we've now got 48 in the good group, 24 in the bad group. For the kind of games won statistic. When it comes for points per game, we've actually got 62 in the good, 32 in the bad. And basically, what we've got here is the fact that some of our players where, for example, in this game, win percentage didn't get enough appearances for this statistic to be produced, which is why you got 48 and 24 rather than 67 and 32, which we've got for some of the other ones. But as you can see, if we look at the fact we've got 67 in the good group, 32 in the bad, that's much better. We don't have a group where there's just 1 or 2 in. We've now got bigger groups, and it's not even. So that's still a statistical kind of issue for us, more broadly, if you're being very strict with this. But it's better than it was, so we can actually try and make a meaningful comparison. This table here now has a t-test for each of these variables. So one for win percentage, one for points per games, one for mistakes leading to goals, mistakes, and average rating. And what we can do here is use, essentially we need to ignore this side of the table where it says Levine's test for equality, these two here. This is just a pre-test that tells you which line to read off for the rest of your kind of data. You notice that you've got 2 significance values for each of these. So this is the t-test significance value, and you've got 2 options depending on whether you read the top line or the bottom line. We won't get too much into which line you need to be reading off, because for our purposes it doesn't actually matter for this. But if we look through this, for games 1, 0.011 is less than 0.05, as is the other version of it, 0.02, so it doesn't matter which one we use for this. So they're both less than 0.05, so we can say there's been a significant effect of personality type on the games won, game win percentage. If we look down at all these other ones, all of these values are above 0.05. So for points per game, mistakes leading to goals, mistakes, and average rating, there's no effect of personality type, good or bad. There's no significant difference in their kind of scores. And we can kind of see this if we go back and look at the group statistics where the means and things are. So for example, for points per game, for the good personality group there's 1.9, for the bad it's 1.8. For the mistakes leading to goal, it's 0.08 for the good, so slightly less, and bad 0.2, but it's not a huge amount, that's a tiny fractional difference. For mistakes made, you've got 15.2 and 15.6, there's barely any difference there, and for average rating you've got 6.95 or 6.97. So those differences are tiny and they're not statistically significant. There's no real difference, so we just assume there's no difference between them. But for the game won percentage, for the good group, the good personalities, they're winning 68% of their games. So that 0.68 we just convert to a percentage because it's originally as a percentage. So 68% of their games are being won by the good personality group. The bad personality group are only winning 59% of their games. So there's a 9% difference in the win rate between the good group and the bad group. Now there's a bit of statistical noise in there because the good players and the bad players play together, and it's not like one set of players will get a win for it and the other players will not get a win for it. They'll all get a win for every game they win playing together. But over the balance of like 4 seasons or so, where you've got different combinations of players and things like that, you can see there starts to be a difference between the win rates. And in this case, it's about a 9% difference, and this 9% is a statistically significant difference. So the good personality group are 9% better in terms of win rate. And let's be really kind of cheeky here and just assume that it's 10%. Let's just round up for this one, even though that's being slightly generous, but let's say it's 10% of your games, there's 10% difference. They're winning 10% more games. If you've got a 30-game season, 10% of that's 3 games, which is a 9-point boost, essentially. So by playing a team of good personalities compared to bad personalities, you should see, according for me with my team, a 9-point difference at the end of a 30-game season, which mine isn't. I think mine's 28 in the league plus cup games, so it's slightly different, but it's still about 8 points in the end. So this is quite useful in that we've managed to get around the other personality issue. If you had enough players in each of those 13 categories or something, or if you've got a different spread, maybe you've only got 4 or 5 different personalities and you've got kind of even amounts of groups, so you've got enough in each group to make those comparisons. You could do an ANOVA, but if you can't, then you can just split it into 2 groups like this in a very kind of crude way and see what impact that has. So what that's telling me is, actually, in the long run, changing personality should have an effect on my point total at the end. And although you might think to yourself, well, obviously it does, otherwise why would we have good personalities and bad personalities? Why is it in the game? But if personality sort of affects a lot of different things, like how they train, how they improve, how they react to media, how they react to player interactions, things like that. It's a very complicated web of connections and influences. But I've managed to strip this down and say, well, actually, good personality, more points at the end. Therefore, I need to bring in more of those players of my good personalities. So remember, this includes people who are not fairly sporting. So the fairly sporting ones are bad for me in this instance. Players who are fairly ambitious and unambitious are equally bad for me, so they're in the bad group. So it gives me a set of good player kind of traits, or personalities I should say, to look for when I recruit. And because it's that 9% difference, in this case it's worked out as about 9 points, just by chance really, that's actually quite worthwhile. So I don't know when this video is going to go out, but in my 4th season of my FM Tahiti game with my Aurora 2 Humpbacks, I lost out on the title by 7 points. If I'd had a team of all good personality players, then what my statistics here are telling me is I would have actually probably won it by 2. In a very kind of crude sense, there's a whole range of some side tangential statistical issues with that kind of comparison, but it's something that I can use to guide my recruitment in the future to try and squeeze out those extra points. So what else can we look at? One thing I mentioned was age. So if we go back to this, age is actually a score variable. So we've got 16, 25, 23, their actual age in years. We can't use this as a grouping variable because otherwise we'd have as many groups as there are different years. So what we can do is tell it to create categories for this, and we'll just use 2 for our purposes. So there's something called visual binning. What visual binning does is it takes any of these scale variables we've got and tries to turn them into categories. So we're going to call the new category age binned. It's telling us currently our youngest age is 14, our maximum, so our oldest for this is 29, quite a young squad. What we're going to tell it to do is make a cut point, and then everything below the cut point goes into one group, everything above goes into the other. So what we're going to do is say our first cut point is going to be 25, because 26 and above is when players are technically in their prime for most positions. I'm just going to say we want 1 cut point there. When we apply it, let's put the cut point in roughly here. So actually we've got a bigger, younger group compared to older. If we wanted to just have 2 equal groups, we could tell it to do that. So in this bit with the make cut points, we could have this instead, and it would give us a cut point here at 20. So basically half of my squad are 20 or below and the other half are 21 and above. So we could do it like this. What we'll do first is actually just do it with equal. So we'll use 25 instead. Tell it to do that. And when we look back at the sheet, we've got this new one here called age binned. So 1 is below 25 and 2 is above. And we just run this now as independent t-test like we did before. So instead of good bad, let's put age binned in there, 1 and 2. And yeah, the mean win percentage between the 2 groups is 65 to 65. Points per game for the slightly older groups, slightly larger, 2 compared to 1.9. Number of mistakes leading to goal, 0.11 to 0.2. Mistakes, actually fewer mistakes in the younger group, and then the average points got 6.9 to 7. So looking at the means, they're actually all quite close. And when we look at the significant values here, it's telling us there's actually no real statistical difference either. So one age group isn't better at any of these things than the other age group. But one thing that might have been skewing that is the fact that actually there's very few in the older age group. So let's go back again. Just try here. Go to visual binning again. Stick age in here. Let's give it a name. Make our cut points, but this time we go for the equal one. 1 cut point, so we've got equal sample size. So 20 is our cutoff now. Now when we go to analyze, then samples t-test, put in all the things we're interested in. Define our binned age again and run it. And this time, if we look at the significance values first, so average rating, you've got 0.056. That is just above the cutoff point for significance. So we have to treat this as there's no significant difference in average rating between the two age groups, but it is very close. If we go down, no difference in win percentage, no difference in points per game, no difference in mistakes leading to goals, but there is a difference, a significant difference here in mistakes made, so 0.017. And if we look at the actual means, mistakes made, so the age group of up to 20 is making on average 12 mistakes, and those above are making 18.4 mistakes. So actually the older age range seems to be more error prone. Not in terms of errors leading to, mistakes that cost us goals, but just generally more error prone. I have no idea why that might be. I have no idea whether that's a relevant kind of difference, because this is just split into two equalish groups. You've got 48 in one, 51 in the other. It's done the best they can to give you two comparably sized groups, but that breakdown of 20 and 20 and above isn't actually that useful for us. What we might find is a bit better is if we have 3 age ranges, so up to about 21, 21 to about 25, and then above, and they won't necessarily be even, but we can look at that. So, see if it'll let me do it. So you can try and visually bin age again. And it's going to be age bin 3 or something like that. So you want our first cut point to be at, say, 21. Actually, no, let's say at 19, because that's our kind of youth players. We want there to be, technically, 3 points. It's too many, so we've needed to give us 2. So you've got one group here, one group here, one group here, and one group here. So it's got up to 19, 19 to 22, 22 to 26, and so on. Let's tell it to go for 19 again. I want 2 cut points. So there we've got up to 19, then 19 to 25, and then, well, 19 to 24, and then 24 and above. That might be a little bit more useful for us. So we've binned that. It's a technical term. Binned it. And then we go to our ANOVA, because we've got 3 groups. We can't use the t-test for this. Go to univariates. Put in age binned. Put in the right one. Yep, that's the right one. Now, dependent variable here. Let's put in rating. Just make sure we've got all our options, descriptives. Test afterwards, our post hoc test. Just get it to run. So what it's telling us here is we've got 46 in the first age group, 28 and then 25 in the next age ranges. The mean average rating for the youngest group is 6.9, and then it's 7 and 7 again for the other age groups. And when we look at the effect of age, so age bin 3, because that's our age variable, we've got a significance value of 0.03, and that's less than 0.05, so age is having a significant effect on average rating. And when we look at the comparisons here, this is what it's trying to do, the kind of 1 to 2, 1 to 3, and it looks like the one approaching the significance difference is the difference between the youngest and the oldest age range, but still not quite a significant level. But it seems to be reflecting for this one that maybe there's a difference between the youngest and the oldest group, so those who are young and developing and those who are in their prime. So maybe there is a reason to be recruiting people above a certain age range. I've got issues with my data though, because my age ranges aren't all equal, and my upper age range only really goes up to 29 because my team's quite young. Could be very different for you. See if we can quickly analyse the same, but let's get rid of average rating, put in win percentage, because that was interesting for the other one. Yeah, there's no significant difference in win percentage. I imagine it'll be the same for quite a few of these other comparisons. But there we go. So we've had a go at comparing different age groups, we've had a go at comparing different personality types and dumbing it down a little bit to just good or bad personality types, but we found that personality can have a big effect. So 9% difference in win rate for my team, at the very least, which means going forwards, I'm going to be tweaking my team selection to try and reflect that, my recruitment to reflect that, to eke out those extra points. And it also means I might start favouring older players to do that if there's not a huge difference between the old and the young. And when there is, it seems to be favouring the older age groups. So I'll stop there. The next episode will probably be on multiple regression, and then we'll have a few episodes about very specific things I've played around with and found to help my team out. So thanks very much for watching.